"Please don't touch the merchandise, sir." The words cut through the murmur of champagne-tinged conversations, drawing all eyes to the elderly man in his worn suit. His weathered fingers hovered just inches from the glass case, trembling slightly in the spotlight of collective judgment. Behind him, a security guard stepped forward, hand raised as if the old man might shatter the display with a mere glance. What the room of collectors, critics, and connoisseurs couldn't see was how those same fingers had once assembled the very masterpiece they'd gathered to worship. In the corner, partially hidden by a pillar of polished marble, a man in a tailored Tom Ford suit paused mid-sip of his champagne. The exhibition hall of the Grand Geneva Hotel had been transformed for the Timeless Masterpieces showcase, where watches worth more than most people's homes gleamed under precision lighting. The old watchmaker, Anton Meyer, stood out like a wrinkle in silk among the black-tie guests who paid $10,000 per ticket just to breathe the same air as these mechanical marvels. The centerpiece, a platinum chronograph with over 900 hand-assembled components, sat behind triple-reinforced glass, its dial catching light like a trapped star. The curator, glass of Dom Pérignon in hand, continued addressing the small crowd, deliberately turning his shoulder to Anton. This particular piece represents the pinnacle of Swiss craftsmanship, a tradition protected by those who truly understand its value. A few knowing chuckles rippled through the audience. Anton's eyes never left the watch, his watch, as he retreated a step, dignity wounded, but intact. The small brass nameplate beneath the display made no mention of him, crediting only the luxury brand that had acquired his workshop after 50 years of independent creation. The whispers had already begun, speculations about this shabby interloper who clearly didn't belong. A woman in diamonds worth a small fortune raised her eyebrows at her companion, a barely concealed smirk playing on her surgically enhanced lips. Neither noticed how the man by the pillar had lowered his champagne, his intense gaze shifting between the watchmaker, the curator, and the timepiece. Leonardo DiCaprio's expression changed from casual observation to focused attention. The lesson about true value that was about to unfold would be remembered long after the champagne went flat. Anton Meyer stood with his hands clasped before him, a position his fingers remembered from 60 years of watchmaking. Patient, controlled, ready for precision work. His weathered face, lined like an intricate watch mechanism, revealed nothing, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of pain. For 5 decades, he had worked in a small workshop in the mountains outside Geneva, his reputation surviving on whispered recommendations among true collectors who valued the craftsman over the brand. When Kronos Luxury Group purchased his workshop 3 years ago, they had promised to preserve his legacy. Instead, they had buried it, keeping only his designs and discarding the man. The curator, Philippe Beaumont, continued his rehearsed speech, each word polished to perfection like the sapphire crystal protecting the watches on display. The Kronos Celestial represents over 200 years of heritage, a testament to our brand's unwavering commitment to perfection. He deliberately avoided looking at Anton, though his posture acknowledged the old man's presence, a threat to the carefully constructed narrative of corporate heritage. Around them, the crowd of wealth and influence nodded appreciatively, crystal glasses catching the light like the diamonds adorning wrists and necks, everyone playing their part in this theater of exclusivity. The security guard remained positioned like a shadow behind Anton, a silent reminder that the old man was being tolerated, not welcomed. A few smartphone cameras had captured the moment of confrontation, their owners sharing amused glances at this disruption of decorum. The whispers continued, a quiet current running beneath the curator's practiced speech. Who is that? Some former employee, I think. How did he even get in here? The judgments fell like hammer strikes on precious metal, shaping the narrative of an old man who needed to be removed. Anton took another step back, his dignity a shield against their disdain. His eyes never left the watch, the celestial chronograph, with its perpetual calendar and moon phase complications. He had designed the movement in his workshop, spending 3 years perfecting the interaction of over 900 components, each hand-finished under his magnifying glass. Now it gleamed behind glass, priced at $2.8 million, wearing another name like a stolen identity. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne, deliberately pivoting away when Anton looked up. The message was clear. He might be tolerated in the room, but he was not a guest. From his position near the marble column, Leonardo DiCaprio observed everything, his face a study in controlled awareness as he registered each microaggression directed at the watchmaker. Filippo Beaumont gestured theatrically toward the centerpiece display. What makes this particular model truly exceptional is the moon phase complication, accurate to 1 day in 122 years. A few appreciative murmurs rippled through the crowd. Our in-house artisans have elevated traditional techniques to new heights of perfection. The lie hung in the air, invisible but palpable to those who knew the truth, particularly to Anton, whose innovation had made the accuracy possible through a mechanism so elegant other watchmakers had called it impossible until they saw it working. A woman in a red gown leaned toward her companion. "Darling, I want that one for your collection," she said, loud enough to be heard, pointing a manicured finger at the celestial. Her husband nodded indulgently, as if acquiring a multi-million-dollar timepiece were as simple as selecting a dessert. Anton's expression flickered, a brief crack in his composed facade. These people saw only the gleaming exterior, the brand, the status, not the thousands of hours of failed attempts, not the innovation, not the soul transferred from creator to creation. Leonardo DiCaprio had begun to move, casually but purposefully, circling the room like a satellite drawn into a new orbit. His path seemed random to casual observers, but he was closing the distance to the confrontation, brewing between past and present, between creator and commodification. His eyes met Anton's briefly across the room, a moment of recognition, not of faces, but of something deeper, a mutual understanding of authenticity in a room largely devoid of it. Around them, the champagne continued to flow, the conversations buzzed, and the watches ticked away seconds that would soon crystallize into a moment none of them would forget. The curator's presentation continued its carefully choreographed path toward the crescendo, the unveiling of a new prototype scheduled for release next year at a price point that would make even this crowd pause. Anton had begun to retreat toward the periphery, but something kept him anchored in place, perhaps a sense of ownership that transcended legal documents, perhaps simple stubbornness. A younger security guard, sensing an opportunity for visible diligence, approached the old watchmaker. "Sir, perhaps you would be more comfortable waiting outside," he suggested, his polite tone barely masking the command. His hand hovered near Anton's elbow, not quite touching, but threatening guidance. The conversation nearest them faltered, then resumed at a lower volume, as eyes slid sideways to watch. Anton straightened his spine, dignity assembling like the components of a fine movement. "I designed that watch," he said, his voice quiet but steady, carrying further than intended in the momentary lull. "I built the first 5 prototypes by hand. That specific caliber, the CH-718, was named after my daughter's birthday." The security guard's expression wavered between embarrassment and determination. Filippo Beaumont had paused mid-sentence, his rehearsed patter disrupted by this unscheduled complication. "Sir," the guard continued more firmly now, "the exhibition is invitation only. I need to see your credentials." Anton reached slowly into his worn jacket, producing a small leather folder. Inside was an ID card from Kronos Group, with Master Watchmaker Emeritus beneath his name. The photo showed a slightly younger man, but with the same dignified eyes. "I received an invitation," Anton said. "Not from them," he nodded toward Beaumont, "but from the CEO. Mr. Gerard remembers who actually built these pieces." The guard examined the ID with visible uncertainty, looking toward Beaumont for direction. The curator's face had tightened, his smile becoming a brittle mask. Several phones had emerged from pockets and clutches, recording the confrontation with the predatory instinct of those who smell social blood in the water. Philippe Beaumont recovered his composure with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to managing inconvenient truths. He handed his champagne flute to a nearby waiter and approached, his smile recalibrated to diplomatic precision. "Mr. Meyer," he acknowledged with a slight nod, "of course we're honored by your historical contribution to the brand. However, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. Mr. Gerard is actually in Tokyo this week for the Asian market launch." His voice carried just enough volume to ensure nearby guests could hear, establishing the narrative of a confused old man. "Perhaps we could arrange a private viewing for you tomorrow, when we're not quite so—" He gestured discreetly at the crowd of elite clientele, occupied with our premier collectors. The implication was crystal clear. You don't belong here. Not among these people. Not anymore. A woman nearby whispered audibly to her companion, "How sad. Dementia, probably." Her false compassion was a transparent veneer over naked condescension. Anton's weathered hands that had assembled countless miniature universes of gears and springs, curled slightly at his sides. His voice, when he spoke, carried the precision of a master watchmaker, each word carefully placed. "The moon phase calibration system in that watch," he pointed to the celestial chronograph, "took me 16 months to perfect. The solution came to me at my workbench at 3 in the morning. I called it the Dreamer's Algorithm. Your marketing materials call it the Celestial Solution. Different name, same invention." For those closest, the confrontation had become uncomfortable. For those farther away, it was entertainment, the drama of exclusivity being challenged. Several more phones captured video, social media moments in the making. The security guard looked increasingly uncertain, caught between protocols and the growing realization that this wasn't a standard security issue. Leonardo DiCaprio had positioned himself within earshot, his attention seemingly focused on examining a vintage pocket watch collection, though his eyes periodically flicked toward the confrontation. His expression had changed from casual observation to focused interest, the characteristic intensity he brought to his roles now directed at the unfolding human drama. Beaumont's professionally maintained facade cracked slightly, a hairline fracture in his polished veneer. "Mr. Meyer, while your contributions to watchmaking are noted in our archives, I must emphasize that Kronos Group has significantly refined and elevated the original concepts. Our in-house team has—" "Your in-house team called me 18 times during development," Anton interrupted, his voice gaining strength. "The last call was from your chief engineer at midnight because the prototype kept losing 3 seconds per day, and they couldn't determine why." A dangerous silence had fallen over the nearby crowd. The curator's complexion darkened slightly, embarrassment transmuting to anger. For the elite audience, the exhibition had unexpectedly transformed from a showcase of luxury timepieces to a human drama more compelling than any promotional video. "That's quite enough," Beaumont said, his voice hardening as he gestured subtly to the security personnel. "Mr. Meyer clearly needs some assistance. Perhaps we should continue our presentation after a brief—" "I believe Mr. Meyer is owed an explanation, at minimum." The voice, calm, measured, instantly recognizable, cut through the tension like a jeweler's saw through metal. The crowd parted instinctively as Leonardo DiCaprio stepped forward, his presence shifting the room's center of gravity. Several gasps of recognition rippled through the audience, phones now diverted from the conflict to capture the unexpected celebrity. Beaumont's professional training kicked in automatically, his face reorganizing into pleased surprise. "Mr. DiCaprio, we had no idea you were attending tonight. It's truly an honor." "I've been following Mr. Meyer's work for years," Leonardo continued, disregarding the attempt at redirection. He turned toward Anton, extending his hand. "Your Celestial series represents the pinnacle of independent watchmaking. The integration of astronomical functions with mechanical movement is unparalleled." The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of silence that marks watershed moments. Anton slowly took the offered hand, surprise momentarily overriding his dignity. The curator stood frozen, his rehearsed world suddenly tilted on its axis. The watching crowd, phones raised like totems, captured every second of this collision between celebrity power and corporate narrative. In that suspended moment, as hands clasped between the celebrated actor and the forgotten craftsman, the power dynamics of the room underwent a seismic shift. The exhibition hall had transformed into something resembling a film set, with Leonardo DiCaprio and Anton Meyer at center stage. The curator stood momentarily paralyzed, his carefully constructed narrative disintegrating before his eyes. Phones captured every moment, as Leonardo, with the ease of someone accustomed to commanding attention, placed a respectful hand on the watchmaker's shoulder. "I've been collecting mechanical watches for nearly 20 years, Leonardo said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the now silent room. "And I've learned that understanding who makes something is as important as what they make." He turned to address the crowd directly, his natural charisma drawing them in like gravity. "Most of us wear watches as status symbols or accessories, but for craftsmen like Mr. Meyer, there's something far more profound, a marriage of art, science, and human ingenuity." Beaumont attempted to reclaim control, stepping forward with a strained smile. "Indeed, which is why Kronos Group has always valued our heritage artisans. Now, if we could return to our presentation—" "Actually," Leonardo interrupted smoothly, "I'm more interested in hearing Mr. Meyer's perspective on that particular piece." He gestured toward the celestial chronograph, "especially since he designed it." The curator's expression flickered between professional courtesy and panic. The crowd's attention had completely shifted, their allegiance following the gravitational pull of celebrity. Several collectors who had been dismissive of Anton moments before were now studying him with newfound interest, social calculation evident in their expressions. The woman in the red dress who had casually pointed at the multi-million-dollar watch now watched Anton with the intensity of someone witnessing an investment opportunity materialize out of thin air. Leonardo guided Anton toward the display case, effectively positioning himself between the watchmaker and the security personnel. "Would you mind telling us about the moon phase complication?" he asked. "I understand it's accurate to within 1 day over a century." Anton stood straighter now, dignity returning like blood to numbed limbs. The watchmaker approached the display case, his reflection ghosting over the sapphire crystal surface. For a moment he seemed to forget the audience, his eyes focused only on his creation. "The moon phase was the greatest challenge," he said, his voice soft but clear. "Traditional moon phase complications are usually accurate to 1 day in 122 years. I wanted to create one accurate to 1 day in 1021 years. He smiled slightly. "A bit of vanity, perhaps. But watchmaking has always been about pushing boundaries." Leonardo nodded encouragingly. "And how did you achieve that?" "By reimagining the gear ratio calculations and creating a differential system that compensates for the lunar anomaly, the variation in the moon's orbit." Anton's hands moved instinctively, sketching invisible mechanisms in the air. Most moon phase complications use a 59-tooth drive wheel, because the lunar cycle is approximately 29.5 days, but this oversimplifies the actual cycle. As Anton spoke, a transformation swept over him. The stooped shoulders straightened, the weathered face animated with passion, the hands, once uncertain, now moved with the precision of a conductor. The watchmaker had returned to his element. "I designed a compound differential system with 135 teeth on the primary wheel and 137 on the secondary. The calculations required." He paused, noticing the technical depth he was reaching. But Leonardo nodded encouragingly, genuinely engaged, and several of the collectors had moved closer, their interest piqued by this unexpected masterclass. The curator watched helplessly as his carefully orchestrated event was commandeered. His expression oscillated between professional composure and thinly veiled alarm as phones continued recording. What had begun as a potential embarrassment for Anton had metamorphosed into a viral moment for the brand, though not the one Beaumont had planned. "The most beautiful aspect of the complication isn't visible," Anton continued, his voice gathering strength. "It's hidden beneath the dial, a series of stepped gears arranged like a miniature amphitheater. I called it the Celestial Theater. Each gear performs its role with perfect precision, unseen but essential." Leonardo turned to Beaumont, his expression pleasant but resolute. "Would it be possible to open the case? I think we'd all benefit from seeing the movement with Mr. Meyer's guidance." The request hung in the air like a suspended pendulum. The curator's face contorted briefly with internal conflict. To refuse would create an awkward situation with a high-profile celebrity. To agree would fully cede control of his event. Several collectors murmured their support, smartphones still recording every moment of the unfolding drama. That would be highly irregular," Beaumont began, but even as he spoke, he was reaching for the security keycard hanging at his belt. The power dynamics had shifted irrevocably. With reluctant precision, he unlocked the display case. The room collectively held its breath as Anton Meyer reached in with reverent hands and lifted the timepiece. The watchmaker produced a loop from his pocket, a tool he apparently carried always, and held it to his eye as he carefully turned the watch over. "Remarkable," Leonardo commented, peering closely as Anton pointed out details invisible to the naked eye. "The finishing on the bridges is extraordinary." "Hand-beveled and polished," Anton confirmed, 40 hours of work on the anglage alone. He looked up at the crowd, speaking now with the quiet confidence of absolute mastery. "A watch like this is not merely a product, it is a philosophy expressed through mechanics. When properly executed, it will outlive all of us in this room, still keeping perfect time centuries after we are gone." The statement settled over the audience like dust on a museum display. Several collectors exchanged glances, a new understanding dawning. They weren't merely buying luxury objects, but becoming temporary custodians of timeless artistry. Beaumont attempted one final reassertion of authority. "Yes, well, Kronos Group is committed to preserving these traditional values while innovating for the future." "What most don't understand," Leonardo interrupted, addressing the room while gesturing toward Anton, "is that true luxury isn't about price or exclusivity, it's about the thousands of hours of expertise, the generations of knowledge, and the individual vision that someone like Mr. Meyer brings to his craft." He turned to face Beaumont directly. "Without the master craftsman, you have nothing but an empty brand." The statement landed like a hammer on an anvil, reshaping the atmosphere of the room. Several collectors nodded in agreement, their perception visibly shifting. What had begun as a standard luxury showcase had transformed into something far more meaningful, a reclamation of value, a restoration of proper attribution. The exhibition continued, but with a fundamental shift in atmosphere. Anton Meyer, who had arrived as an unwelcome ghost from the brand's past, now stood at the center of attention. The curator had strategically retreated to a supportive role, professional training enabling him to adapt to the altered dynamics with minimal visible discomfort. Leonardo remained by Anton's side, his celebrity status creating a protective field that transformed the watchmaker from interloper to honored guest. "Would you sign my catalog, Mr. Meyer?" A collector approached, offering the glossy exhibition book and a pen. "Next to your watch, of course." Others followed, the social current reversing direction as surely as a tide. The same people who had whispered and stared now sought proximity, connection, authentication. Anton accommodated each request with quiet grace, neither gloating in his redemption nor holding grudges for the earlier dismissal. His weathered fingers moved across pages with the same precision they had once applied to watchmaking, signing his name beside images of his creations. The woman in the red dress who had casually indicated she wanted that one now addressed Anton directly. "I never realized the human story behind these pieces," she admitted, with surprising candor. "It changes how I see them entirely." Anton nodded, his expression thoughtful. "A fine watch is always more than the sum of its parts," he said. "Like any meaningful creation, it carries the spirit of its maker." He glanced at the celestial chronograph, now returned to its display case. "That piece contains 3 generations of watchmaking knowledge. My grandfather taught my father, who taught me. In that sense, it's not just my creation, it's theirs as well." Across social media, the unexpected encounter had already begun spreading beyond the exhibition hall. Clips of Leonardo DiCaprio defending the elderly watchmaker against corporate erasure accumulated thousands of shares within minutes. Close-up videos of Anton explaining the watch's mechanisms, with Leonardo looking on admiringly, were being tagged with comments like, "This is what respect looks like," and "When Hollywood meets real craftsmanship." Philippa Beaumont, sensing both threat and opportunity in the viral moment, had conferred with his team and approached Leonardo and Anton with a proposition. "Mr. Meyer, we would be honored if you would consent to a special segment in our presentation. Perhaps you could share some of your insights about the development process." The curator's attempt at co-option was transparent, but also pragmatic. The narrative had changed. Adaptation was the only sensible response. Anton agreed with a simple nod, his expression suggesting he recognized the calculation but accepted it nonetheless. In a quiet moment as the exhibition arrangements were being reconfigured, Leonardo and Anton stood slightly apart from the crowd, watching the social elite who now viewed the watchmaker with newfound respect. "Thank you," Anton said simply. "Not many would have done what you did." Leonardo smiled slightly. "I collect watches, but I value authenticity above all. In my industry, I've seen too many people take credit for others' creative work." He glanced around the room. "These watches will outlive all of us. The least we can do is remember who actually made them." A young woman approached tentatively, her press badge identifying her as from a luxury lifestyle magazine. "Mr. DiCaprio, could I ask what drew you to Mr. Meyer's work specifically?" Leonardo gestured to Anton. "Why don't you ask the master directly? I'm just an enthusiast. He's the one who created horological history." As the evening drew to a close, the exhibition had transformed into something unplanned yet more authentic than its original concept. Anton Meyer had been invited to the podium, where he spoke briefly about his 50 years of watchmaking, his voice steady and clear, his passion evident in every word. The attendees listened with genuine interest, their perception permanently altered. They had come to see luxury objects, but had discovered the human genius behind them instead. The celestial chronograph, still displayed prominently, still carrying its multi-million-dollar price tag, now possessed something more valuable than its material components: a story, a lineage, a human connection. Several serious collectors had approached Anton about commissioning custom pieces, discovering that despite his age, he still maintained a small workshop where he occasionally created watches under his own name. Leonardo and Anton exchanged contact information, with the actor expressing interest in visiting the watchmaker's workshop next time he was in Switzerland. "I'd like to see where the magic happens," he said, with genuine respect rather than celebrity condescension. As the event concluded, Anton stood beside the display containing his creation. His reflection overlaid the watch face, past and present, creator and creation, unified by proximity and recognition. His fingers rested lightly on the glass, no longer forbidden from touching what had always been partly his. "Time is the great equalizer," he said quietly to Leonardo, who had paused beside him for a final moment. "These watches will tick on long after brand names are forgotten and marketing campaigns fade from memory. They will outlast social media, celebrity, even corporate ownership. What endures is the craft itself, the pursuit of perfection in measuring our brief moments in existence." Leonardo nodded thoughtfully. "And the respect due to those who create that perfection." Outside the venue, as guests departed into the cool evening, phones continued to light up with notifications as the story spread further. A small crowd had gathered, hoping to glimpse the famous actor, but many were now equally interested in the elderly watchmaker whose name they were just learning. In that unexpected reversal of recognition, in that restoration of proper attribution, something fundamentally important had been recalibrated, like a fine watch returned to perfect time.